have an installation in the curational exhibition, and I'm going to explain a piece now, which essentially is about it's about drawing. So to be able to explain a little bit what is there in the exhibition, I will have to go through to take you through a few concepts that I've been developing mainly in the academic world over the years on the act of mapping, on the act of cartography. This is an exercise very shortly that I used to run in Paris in the École Spéciale, where essentially I would ask students to observe a public space in the Jardin du Luxembourg, here on the screen, an area which is actually, if you zoom in, it's a homogeneous surface, an area that doesn't seem to be differentiated, no hierarchy, a pure empty surface. And I would ask the students to observe this area long enough to be able to depict differences, to understand that there is actually a hierarchy and that there are differences within one of these spaces. So here's one of the drawings that comes out of this exercise, which is essentially the path of people moving through the space, but coupled with the amount of energy that a person emits. No? So any person emits energy. We actually do emit energy depending on our age. So a young child emits little energy. A person of 24 years old emits the maximum amount of energy. So the student here worked with the graphic convention in order to transform a line into a series of vectors so dense that little by little it created densities. So I like this drawing a lot because it's and a lot in the context of the Biennale also. Claudia was talking about boundaries yesterday. Often as architects, we work with the line. We draw a line, and often something happens on one side of the line and another thing on the other. This drawing, for me, it's an interesting way to explain the gradient condition, the fact that in a space there are probabilities of events happening more or less, no? Maybe from 0 to 100%, which is one of the themes that I worked here for the installation in the Biennale. This experiment led to another one, where this is work that I've been doing at the IAC, at the Institute for Advanced Architecture of Catalonia, where I asked students to draw without using their body. So each of them paper canvas, ink or pen, and then they would have to find a kinetic event within the city and try to construct a mechanism to make it draw. So this is a horizontal canvas. One of these drawings, if you take a single one, it's a horizontal canvas which is hanging in the metro of Barcelona from Four Springs. And on top of the canvas, there is a ball which is impregnated with ink. So depending on the acceleration, deceleration of the metro, whether it's turning left, turning right, this ball, because of the physical forces, moves around the page and creates these trajectories. These 4 drawings are 4 different lines of the metro in Barcelona, and we can question or discuss the aesthetic characteristics of such drawings, but we can also just look at it on a cartographical level. I think that these drawings are drawings of a tunnel. They're actually quite precise in a way, and they really are maps of a physical condition. This year we had another exhibition which also was related to this topic of the drawing machine, where what we decided is to actually bring the machines indoor, disconnect them in a certain way from the context which they're mapping, and to introduce an open source electronic system which would be able to receive data from the outside. So some students work with wind, others work with sunlight, others worked with noise, and what you can see here, the machines on the floor and on the sides, the drawings that get produced actually during the exhibition, and that again show that in a public space, very often there are actually conditions that are gradual from one place to another. This experiment led us to look at people, where here what we did is we had a camera in one of the most busy public spaces of Barcelona, which would take a picture from above every 1 second, every 1 minute, sorry, and it would send the information to a computer, which is here below this CNC, where we've taken off the router and we've replaced it by a 0.05 pen. So what happens here during the length of the exhibition, a series of drawings were produced, which we see here, 15 drawings. The exhibition was 15 days long. On the top, actually the first drawings were constantly, we had technical issues, so there were bugs, so the drawings were not really doing what we wanted them to do, but little by little, you can see the temp drawings at the bottom, we started to get daily versions of how this public space in Barcelona is being used. It's a drawing of density, it's a drawing that is 12 hours within a public space, showing the occupation and the movement of people throughout. Now, all these experiments, exercises lead to in the studio that I run in YAC, lead to thinking about how to work, to design within the public space. And I'll just show one project in a couple of minutes here, which tackles Glorias, a very big public space in Barcelona, which is actually being refurbished at the moment, where students speculated on the fact that waste could be taken to a fairly central area of the city and be used in order to orchestrate or to maybe choreograph the space. So what you see here is actually metallic dust, which is being moved around with a series of magnets and which mimics the arrival of waste within the public space, and then the waste gets little by little through time filtered into organic waste, synthetic waste, electronic waste, and in the case, for example, of synthetic waste, can serve to activate 3D printers that can start to construct, define, organize, set up a kind of order, spontaneous order within a public space. So back to Tallinn. Claudia approached me together with Marco, asking me to think, to investigate on the water situation in the city, on the contamination of the water in the urban environment in Tallinn. And I'm not an expert in that field, but I started to research. I started to understand a little bit what are the themes. This map that you see here is disposed, or it's framed in a way that the very center of the map is actually the water treatment plant of the city, which gets all the water from the city of Tallinn. As in any European city, the water treatment plant is being fed with the contaminated water that comes from the city, from the sewage system. So when we were looking at maps, we were looking at the city and at the water maps. We found the sewage system, which is relatively complex, but it's a set of lines that are, of course, the pipes that are under the ground and that branch towards, that actually branch in towards the water treatment plant. We wanted to somehow question that as a kind of experiment. So the installation that we do, or that we did, it's a kind of fiction where we are trying to find a way that we can look at water contamination in a different way. We decided to work a lot with the graphical convention, and the first thing that we did is, rather than understanding the city and the water situation in a city as a series of holes, which are essentially our toilets, our sinks, we decided to try to reverse the ground in a certain way, try to avoid, to hide all the pipes of the sewage system, because actually what happens in the city is when we contaminate water with a simple act of washing our hands, for example, in the domestic space, we see the water until it goes through the hole, and then it disappears. We don't need to really think about it anymore. So I thought that in this experiment, in this big drawing project that we did, there might be a way to create, somehow to reverse the city and to bring the contaminated water on top of the level of the city. So imagine that water would be suddenly volatile and would spread around all the components, all the particles, chemical particles, biological particles, and we would somehow render them over the surface of Tallinn. So we worked with a simple graphical convention. You can see here a spiral. We've been placing a spiral on top of every building of the city of Tallinn, which is accompanied by a series of letters, which are the chemical elements that are contained within the water for industrial buildings, service buildings, and domestic buildings. The size of the spiral and the quantity of letters that it carries is function of the amount of square meters of a building, and therefore the amount of water that gets consumed there. So this is an area of Tallinn where you can recognize certain spirals, a fairly low density area, and then here maybe a density that is a bit more dense, where suddenly the spirals and the letters will start to overlap each other and start to create a graphical language of density, of variation, of gradient. So that's how this map, little by little, has come out. So this canvas is 6 meters by 6 meters. The letters are 2.5 millimeters big. I think there's a couple million on it. And little by little, when we zoom out, actually, we can start to recognize the city. So what is this map? This is a map of, I still don't really know how to call it, but it's a kind of map of the emission of the chemical introduction, or the elements that are, the chemical elements and biological elements that are present in the water in the city. But it's kind of a map of potential. Who would use such a map? I'm not sure, but I think we could start to speculate on the fact that certain areas of darkness might be interesting area to start to think about maybe a treatment system that could be distributed over the city. Systems that other cities, especially in Asia, already have started to implement. Essentially, this installation, it's a game. It's a kind of fiction, and it's a conflict somehow between two maps. I've explained you now the black map, which is a fairly, I would say, rational render of the present situation of the city. And then we decided to try to also engage in a physical manner with a kind of generative model. So we introduced color. The image on the right here is just early test of what we decided to play with, to impose something else on top of this black map to start to question it. So this is a picture of our desk in the office. We started to work with ink, we started to work with fans, we started also to work with gradients of colors, mixing colors, and kind of see what happens. So this is in the model, in the performative model, or in the map. This is the water treatment plant. It's the exact position, and essentially it's a few pieces from bottles of perfume, which are fueled by ink and which spit, some of you will have maybe seen it over there, but spits ink into the air to start to colorize the map. Now, around the map there is a series of 12 fans, that are disposed in a circular manner, as maybe, yeah, we can see here in the drawing. So this is, although the lines are a bit light, you can see a large circle around the map of Tallinn with a series of darker dots, which are essentially the fans. So with a simple electronic system, what we've done is we've given every fan a different speed and a different amount of time during which they turn, which depends on the urban density. So a fan, for example, which is located in an area that is pretty dark, and dense urban area, is going to be propelling the air much more than others that are located in white areas. For example, as we see on the map, there are some that are in the sea. No? So the idea, little by little, is that the fans start to bring the contamination away from the city. It's kind of a kind of story, and little by little we anticipated that it would provide a map of gradients, which would be maybe the reverse of the black map. No? So there's really this idea of an initial black map and then a colorful layer on top that is 2 minutes. That are fighting somehow. So this is the installation before putting it in action, where everything is still white. It's only the black map and the sea, and then some ink finally. So as you see on the ground, little by little, these colorful layers start to appear. Their position, of course, is relative to the system of fans and to the code that induced them their movement. And here, as we see maybe in the last photograph that I took yesterday, this map starts to build itself. It's interesting. I mean, we were very interested in the fact that we actually had to run the experiment to understand how this new map would start to emerge. I think we need another couple of weeks because the ink is actually falling onto such a large surface with such little particles that this experiment needs to run for long to start to unveil itself. We don't know what comes out. We have to run it to see. In that sense, it's a kind of generative experiment, which is based still on somehow rational information from the city. Who can use this map afterwards? This, I have to say that so far we don't know, but I think maybe little by little, while the experiment runs, we might start to discover patterns that we had not necessarily anticipated, as we did with the black map. And the confrontation of these two maps might give maybe possibilities to start to speculate or to start to think on how we could develop in the future the water system of the city of Tallinn. Thank you.